joining us, we have Susan Desjardins. Susan is a board member of Dying with Dignity Canada and was one of the founding members of the Ottawa Chapter, which was established 6 years ago. Having experienced both the unnecessary suffering of a loved one at the end of life and a peaceful death of a loved one who chose an assisted death, she is a strong advocate for choice through life and at death. Susan, thank you for joining us today, and I will now turn it over to you to get started on today's presentation.
Hi, yeah, welcome everyone. As Nicole said, we're delighted that you were able to join us today. And I did notice there was a pop-up question about whether the webinar is going to be an hour. So we expect the presentation to go a little less than an hour, and we would start questions then. But we're also going to try and pepper in a few questions that were quite common that came in ahead of time as well. So we are today going to be talking about advanced care planning and all the considerations that go into it and the kinds of conversations that we would encourage you to have. And we're going to start with a polling question to test your knowledge.
All right, folks, so on your screen, I'm just going to launch this poll here. It's going to pop up and we'll just give you about a minute or so to answer your question there. And we'll be asking the same question at the end of the session too. So hopefully everyone walks away with some additional knowledge this afternoon, and we're excited to see where everyone's at in their advanced care planning process. While you're taking the time to answer that question, I just wanted to flag another question that came through from someone attending today. So they're asking about access to the slides afterwards, and just to reiterate what Nicole said, this will be posted on our website and it will be available. So you can see the slides online and refer back to it as needed. And also you're welcome to share the link to the presentation with any friends or family members who might want to watch this session later on. So it looks like most of you have participated in the poll. I'm going to end polling now, and I'm going to share the results so everybody can see. So 39% of you think that your knowledge of advanced care planning is okay. 33% think it's good. 23% don't know much about it, and 5% feel that their knowledge of advanced care planning is excellent. So we appreciate you sharing that with us. And as mentioned, we'll have a couple more polls for you throughout the session.
So let's talk a bit about what advanced care planning is and why it's so important. It's really a process that is at the heart of you being an empowered patient or caregiver. And it's important for all adults, regardless of whether you're a senior or you have kids or you're just a young adult, because what this is all about is being clear about your own wishes. Should you find yourself in a healthcare situation where you can't speak for yourself. So think of advanced care planning as an umbrella of documents that allows you to plan for a serious injury or illness. Why is it important to consider all of these options? And they include estate planning, financial preparation, a real consideration of your own values and beliefs, ongoing discussions with a variety of people in your life, and health documents. It's important because it means peace of mind for you, and it also reduces the burden that your spokesperson or substitute decision maker, your family or your friends may face when what they really want to be doing is focusing on you. Next slide. So our focus at Dying with Dignity is on your health, your life, your choice. So we're going to be focused today on the health aspects and healthcare as it relates to advanced care planning. We're going to talk about values and beliefs, the discussions that you would want to have related to your advanced care plan, and documentation that supports it. Next slide. So there's some terminology that can be a bit confusing, or maybe you're not that familiar with it. And we're going to talk a bit about it with this slide. So substitute decision maker is a term that you'll hear, and it's commonly used to describe the person that you appoint to make decisions on your behalf if you lose the capacity to consent or to make informed decisions about your own personal care or finances. An advance directive is a document that can support your substitute decision maker. It's prepared by you when you're well and able to make decisions for your own healthcare and finances, in which you state what your wishes are for medical or non-medical care. Advance consent is when a competent person makes a request for assisted dying that could be honored later after they lose the capacity to make medical decisions for themselves. So I'm just going to go into that last bit a little bit further because some of you may have been hearing in the news about Bill C7, which is before Parliament at present. There is a provision in Bill C7 that allows for what is called advance consent. And that is designed for circumstances where an individual who has been assessed and approved for assisted dying and has set a date for their assisted death, it may be at risk of loss of capacity before the date on which they might receive assisted dying. So this legislation would allow that individual to make an agreement with their healthcare provider that they wish to proceed with the assisted death, even if they lose capacity before their scheduled date. So that, as is indicated on the slide, is not currently available. There is another advance, I'm going to call it, which is called an advance request. So an advance request is about an individual being able to make a request for an assisted death while they still retain competence, but for a time in the future, an undefined time in the future, where they may be in circumstances where they have lost the capacity to make an informed healthcare decision. That is not something that's currently being considered with Bill C7, but it is something that the Canadian Parliament committed to considering and reviewing at some time, hopefully when we come out of this pandemic. So it would be subject to a discussion during a parliamentary review. So I just wanted to clarify that for any of you who might be getting confused with all these different terms. Next slide, please. Okay, so what is the difference between advanced care planning and wills? Well, you will prepare a will and perhaps other documentation, and that will essentially be used after you've died. Advanced care planning is something for while you are still alive, and it's capable of making, at the time you prepare the plan, an informed decision, and potentially in a situation later on where you are no longer able to have the capacity to consent. So Kelsey, I think we had a question from a number of people on this topic. Do you want to go ahead and address that?
Yeah, so the question that came through is, if I've made a power of attorney for both health and finances with my will, how does this tie in with advanced care directives or other advanced care planning?
Okay, so I'm taking it that you wanted me to respond to that question.
That'd be great.
Okay, sorry. Since I didn't write it down, would you mind repeating the question?
Yeah,
Thank
no
you.
problem. So this person has made out a power of attorney for their health and for their finances with their wills. So that may have been done with a lawyer, maybe not. But how does this tie in with advanced care directives?
Okay, thank you very much, Kelsey. So your substitute decision maker is the person who you would make sure they understand your wishes very well, and they would speak for you when you are no longer able to speak for yourself. So the Advance Care Directive which we'll talk about a little bit later, basically makes clear what your wishes are for medical care that you would want to have or not want to have. And it's something that you would discuss with your substitute decision maker. And it's essentially part of your longer term healthcare planning. So your substitute decision maker, if I can put it this way, would be intimately involved in conversations about your Advance Care Directive so that they truly understand what it is that you wish for. Should some circumstances arise where you cannot speak for yourself related to healthcare matters. And we can follow up with that if for some reason that wasn't a sufficient response. So we can move on to the next slide. Okay, so how do you create an advanced care plan? So the Dying with Dignity Advanced Care Planning Kit provides a pretty clear documented process, but the main components are, some serious consideration for your own values and beliefs and preferences for future healthcare depending on the circumstances. Designating your substitute decision maker if you haven't already done so. Documenting your values, beliefs, and preferences, and ensuring that you have officially designated a substitute decision maker. And then reviewing these documents on a regular basis to ensure that they still accurately reflect your circumstances and your health situation. I think we can go on to the next chart. So these are some of the steps in the advanced care planning process. As I said, you want to consider your values and beliefs and preferences for future healthcare. And I can say from experience in doing advanced care planning workshops with our Ottawa chapter that we have found doing the workshops that people really enjoy and appreciate being able to talk to others in the workshops and share some of their concerns and the considerations they might have with respect to circumstances they could encounter from a healthcare perspective and their values and beliefs. You want to make sure that you make a decision as to who your substitute decision maker would be. And that is a really important decision because you want someone who knows you well, who respects your values and beliefs, and whom you can trust to carry out your wishes. And it needs to be someone who will support your wishes, who will be your voice when you can't speak for yourself, and who will advocate on your behalf. You want to ensure in your plan that you consider what you want your end of life to be like. You also need to make sure as you do your advance directive that you document all of this information. And that, with respect to other documents that, for instance, you might want to prearrange your funeral, which I have done to unburden your substitute decision maker or family members. You may, for instance, if you are moving into a senior's residence, depending on your circumstances, when they review a healthcare plan with you, you may want to, for instance, have a do not resuscitate order on your file, or you may want to have a no CPR order on your file. One of my elderly relatives did this when she moved into a senior's health facility. She was in quite good health, but she was very clear that, if she had some kind of a life-threatening condition and she could not speak for herself, that she did not want to have any resuscitation practiced on her. You may be wish to be an organ donor, and this is another document that you may want to complete. And we mentioned earlier wills and so on that you would review with your attorney. I think we've covered that, so we can move on to the next area. And we have a polling question.
Yes, so this polling question is about to pop up on your screen. We're curious, how many of you have completed or filled out your advanced care planning documents before? And there's lots of great questions coming through. We see you typing them, and that's fantastic. One that maybe, Susan, you can address just while we're waiting for everyone to answer here is, can you speak to the difference between substitute decision maker and power of attorney?
So there in some ways there's similar terms. The power of attorney can be someone responsible for your financial affairs, as well as someone responsible for your healthcare. So you might have the same person who is the power of attorney for your healthcare and your financial care, or you might have different people for whatever reasons. The substitute decision maker, as we use the term, is someone who will speak on your behalf with respect to your healthcare needs when you are not able to do that.
Great, that's helpful. And most of you have completed the poll, so I'm just going to end it and have it pop up on the screen for you. So most of you haven't completed any advanced care planning documents before. 58% answered no and 42% answered yes. So hopefully we can walk away today with some additional information and get started on our documents.
Okay, and let me just urge you, those of you who have not perhaps done some of these actions, to really get on it after we've gotten through this seminar. As an example, I had established an Advance Care Directive when I was living in Ontario, and I also did the same, once I moved to BC, because it is a little bit different in BC than it is in Ontario. And, it really is important to have our wishes respected when we find ourselves unable to speak for ourselves. So I do urge you to get on with the process later on. Okay, we can move to the next slide. Okay, so the who, the what, and so on with respect to advanced care planning. So who should have an advanced care directive? Well, every adult should have one, so that they ensure that their wishes can be respected if they cannot speak for themselves. And that's the why of doing this. And as I said earlier, easing the burden on the people who may have to make the decision for you, so that they are clear about what your expectations are. So with respect to the Advanced Care Directive, there are two key things that you want to do. You want to appoint your substitute decision maker, because if you don't appoint one, in most provinces, there already is someone designated through a hierarchy as your decision maker, and that person would automatically be the person speaking for you if you haven't appointed someone. And then create your Advance Directive, which is a document within the Advanced Care Planning Kit that you can find on Dying with Dignity's website. And as I said, I urge you to do it now, sooner than later, so that first of all, you've got someone you feel confident in who will speak for you, and you have unburdened your family or your friends from sort of having to wonder what you would have wanted. There's not a requirement for you to see a lawyer with respect to your Advance Directive. You simply have to have it witnessed. So it's pretty easy to do. Other things such as your will, you might have to consult with a lawyer, but it can be well worth it. Okay, we'll move on to the next slide. Okay, so once you understand, hopefully partly as a result of this discussion today, the components of your advanced care plan, you can prioritize which one you feel is most important or urgent to you at this time. Accidents are what they are. They're unexpected, and they can lead us to circumstances where we are not able to speak for ourselves. And so it's really important to have a designated substitute decision maker and a directive that can guide them. Sometimes it's a bit hard to get motivated to do this work, and I certainly would encourage you to consider partnering up with someone, whether you're in a Dying with Dignity workshop You know, there might be someone there that you feel you can, you know, share information with, or you might, you know, have a friend or neighbor or a relative that also doesn't have an advanced care directive, and you could perhaps work with them on it and go at it a bit at a time. You know, maybe schedule a Zoom coffee date or a wine glass date to talk about your values and beliefs with your buddy, and try and get that sort of clarified for yourself, and then move on to the next step in terms of what your wishes are with respect to medical care. And reward yourself, as I said, perhaps a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, or in my case, perhaps a glass of wine, for having completed my revised advanced care directive when I moved to British Columbia. Just think about the value of this and the benefit it brings to those around you, so that they aren't trying to guess what you would have wanted. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. So we talked a bit about this, but the substitute decision maker, or as we said, power of attorney for care, in terms of finances, it's important to have someone who can handle things if you own property, you know, or investments, or just, you know, to your regular daily living requirements if you're not able, again, to speak for yourself. In the area of healthcare, the substitute decision maker can confidently make decisions on your behalf based on the discussions they've had with you and what you've documented. And it varies a little from province to province, but generally speaking, your wishes do have to be respected as they are spoken by the substitute decision maker in the healthcare system. So, you know, again, it provides a little bit of guidance and ammunition, if you will, for your substitute decision maker if they're trying to convince a healthcare professional in one way or another, you know, how you should be treated. Recognize that, of course, you're not going to think of everything that could possibly happen to you, but by being clear about your values and beliefs, and by having these conversations with your family, with your substitute decision maker, with your healthcare provider, you can have a better confidence that they will be able to interpret what it would have been you would have wished for if it's not clear from the Advance Directive, or because the circumstances are different. Also recognize that there are certain situations in which your wishes may not be respected, and this is provided for in legislation in the provinces where, you know, there's an emergency situation and treatment has to be undertaken, perhaps to save a life, and healthcare providers will be required to do that. So, you know, as an example, you know, if you were at home and you had a massive heart attack, and you had said you did not want to be resuscitated in your advanced care directive, the emergency crew that comes to help you, they don't necessarily know that, and they are required to attempt to resuscitate you. So, you know, there are situations where even with all the preparation and work you've done, your wishes may not be respected. Okay, we'll move on to the next slide. Okay, and this is just basically to make it clear to you that every province has its own sort of guidelines and calls certain documents certain things. So you can see here that, for instance, in Alberta, the Advance Directive is called a personal directive. In Ontario, it's called an Advanced Care Directive. And in the Yukon, for instance, it's just a directive. Okay, and on to the next. So who would you want to appoint to be your substitute decision maker? And I think we've talked about this a little bit, but the person has to be of legal age. They need to be an adult. They have to themselves have the mental capacity to be a spokesperson for you. And they also need to be readily available. So it doesn't mean they have to be in the city where you are or the town. but that's probably a good thing. If not, they need to be able to communicate with the healthcare team from wherever they are. And they must not be prohibited from taking on this role by law. And then of course, you have to trust them, that they understand what your wishes are and that they will respect them. So I think, Nicole, we had a question that had come up earlier before the presentation on this.
Yeah, a common question about who to choose as a substitute decision maker, but specifically whether or not you have to live in the same province. A lot of folks reached out saying that they have children who live on the East Coast or the West Coast, opposite ends of them, and do their substitute decision maker, must they be in the same province or territory as them?
So the short answer is no, they do not, although it's helpful if it's someone nearby. You might even consider, for instance, if you have a child outside of the province, and we'll get into having two substitute decision makers, but perhaps you designate the child as the primary. But if you have, let's say, a good friend living in the same community as you who might be able to act as a substitute decision maker, perhaps you designate them as a secondary in the event that you can't reach the first individual. Okay, we'll move on to the next slide, which I think just gives you an idea of the age of majority, which varies by province, and we'll move on to the next slide. So can you appoint two substitute decision makers? So in most provinces and territories, you can appoint two substitute decision makers, and you determine whether they act jointly or independently. And you can find out a bit more about these rules if you look on the website. But very briefly, we strongly recommend that you designate, if you want more than one substitute decision maker, that you designate them independently, to act independently, because if they are designated as joint substitute decision makers, then they both have to agree, they both have to be reached in order for a decision to be made about your care. So that can, and the other issue is it can lead to some disagreements. If one of those individuals change the procedure they appointed. So I recommend to act independently, and that also can be helpful, as I mentioned earlier, if you are the healthcare team, let's say, is trying to reach the first person and they can't, then they could try and reach the second person, and perhaps at that point that person would be more easily accessible, and they could then proceed to provide guidance to the healthcare team. Okay, on to the next slide. So I mentioned earlier, if you don't appoint a substitute decision maker, there is generally in each province a hierarchy of individuals who would be called upon in order of the hierarchy to act as your substitute decision maker. So generally the hierarchy starts with a spouse or parent, or it could be a child or parent. The next order, a parent with a right of access, on to brother or sister, another relative or close friend, and eventually you get down to the office of the guardian and the trustee. And I don't think any of us wants the office of the guardian and the trustee to be making decisions for us. So even, in Nunavut, there is no hierarchy such as this, and you cannot appoint a substitute decision maker prior to actually needing one, but healthcare providers will look to someone who they feel understands what your wishes are and can provide insight into what you might wish. Okay, we'll move on to the next slide. Okay, so it's always a challenge to initiate a discussion about you yourself being in a situation, a grave healthcare situation where you can't speak for yourself. And I have to say, we had one advanced care planning workshop in Ottawa where one of the individuals participating said they had actually decided to spring it on their family after the Christmas dinner. So I don't know if that's something you would want to do, but these are some suggested ways in which you could initiate the topic. Perhaps you want to engage the person by saying, look, I read this interesting book by, for instance, Atul Gawande, and I really would like to discuss it with you. Or perhaps you and the person that you want as your substitute decision maker or your family members have been with a loved one who died recently, and you want to talk to them about something that they don't want to talk about, which is, what about if I'm really sick or I'm dying? So these are all some suggestions about how you could perhaps approach this. We could go to the next slide. Okay, and there's a tip here for you that you can create an in case of emergency contact on your cell phone, and that could lead emergency care providers immediately to your designated spokesperson or substitute decision maker. And I will say that being a technology dinosaur, I actually did go through this process on my iPhone. And there's an app on your iPhone called Health. And within that Health app, you can actually create this, provide a bit of information about yourself for emergency responders and identify your emergency contact. And as I understand it, they can access this particular information even if your screen is locked. So don't take my word for it, try it out. But I think it's fairly straightforward for anyone who might want to do that. Okay, we'll move on to the next slide. So an advance directive, when is it used, who uses it, and do I need to have one? If you're not convinced you need to have one yet, we'll keep working on it. But I really do urge you to have it. In a medical emergency or any circumstance that leaves you unable to make your own healthcare decisions, your advance directive as a tool for your substitute decision maker will ensure that to the best of their ability, the healthcare team will be able to respect your wishes. It helps those who are responsible for speaking for you to try and choose the right care and treatment. And it basically, as I said earlier, reduces the burden that's placed on them in trying to figure out what might be the best approach you can take. Only you can create an advanced care directive. No one else can create it for you. It's a reflection of what your wishes are. So it's your responsibility. Okay, we'll move on to the next slide. And again, here we are with some of the variations in terminology from one province to another. But in the end, you only need to be concerned about your province, and Dying with Dignity has specific information on a province by province and territory basis on the website. Okay, we'll move on to the next. So some of these slides they tie into the advanced care planning kit that is on Dying with Dignity's website. But basically, this is about you're making choices about things that are important to you, about your own values. So I'll give you an example. Imagine, and this actually happened with a relative of mine who was quite elderly. You're living in a nursing home or in a senior's residence, and you just need a little bit of help occasionally to bathe and perhaps to eat. And then all of a sudden you suffer a catastrophic, life-threatening event. It could be a cardiac arrest. It could be, in the case of my relative, it was pneumonia. And all of a sudden you're thinking, wow, this is pretty serious. what do I want to happen about this? So in the case of my relative, she was hospitalized with pneumonia, and it was a near thing, but she did recover, and she came back to her seniors residence. But a week later, she was back in the hospital again. And at that point, she was diagnosed with congestive heart failure, which in her view was much more serious because it's a chronic and sort of a devastating long-term condition. Whereas in her mind, pneumonia was not such a big deal because she could recover from that. So at the point at which she received the diagnosis of congestive heart failure, that was when she really seriously started thinking about not making sure that there was a do not resuscitate order in place for her, and what her wishes were for end of life and how she wanted her end of life to occur. Kelsey, I think there's another question on this topic. So if you wanted to go ahead with that.
Yeah, so a question that we got quite a bit is, when it comes to these documents, can a family member override anything that you've written down or discussed? And if you could speak to that, that would be great.
Well, I think we come back to what we discussed earlier, which is if you do not appoint a substitute decision maker, then there is a hierarchy that is in place, and whoever's at the top of that hierarchy is the first person they'll go to. So I would say the short answer is, if you actively designate a substitute decision maker, you choose someone who is able to respect and represent your wishes to the healthcare system, and the healthcare practitioners must pay attention to the substitute decision maker's expression of your wishes. So I think that's the protection that having designated your own substitute decision maker offers to you. Okay, we'll move on to the next slide. Okay, these are tools that are used within the Advanced Care Planning kit to help you think through what your values are and what's really important to you in terms of your life and how you live your life. For instance, for myself, I think quality of life is really important at this stage in my life. And I feel very strongly that, if I could not do the kinds of things I'm doing right now, like the volunteer work I do with Dying with Dignity, that would really influence what I wanted in terms of care. Should I be faced with some kind of grievous and irremediable condition? So, I think it just encourages you to reflect on what is and has been important to you in your life. I think we can move on to the next. The other thing for you to consider as you're doing your Advanced Care Directive is, your own end of life wishes, and what would you want your life to look like, the end of life to look like? Where would you want to be? What do you think you would be doing? Who would you want with you? Do you want the support of, someone from a spiritual perspective? Are there certain projects that you'd want to undertake? I think of one individual who worked with us as a volunteer in Ottawa who, hosted a really special 90th birthday party because, I think she felt her health was quite undermined and was concerned about end of life, and she wanted to get all her friends and family and the people she valued together. And are there things that you would want to do by which you might be remembered? Do you want to record a message to people? Do you want to have a video talking about your life, or whatever it might be? So I think we might have another polling question coming up here.
I don't think so, Susan. Sorry, I'm not seeing one. I think we'll just move on to keep talking about Advance Directive.
Yeah, no, sorry, that's I had mistaken note there. So, you may have a wish, for instance, to die at home, which many Canadians do, or in a hospice or hospital. But it may or may not be possible. Sometimes it's difficult, for instance, to get into hospice, or the particular condition you have might make it difficult for you to be cared for at home. But, again, if your substitute decision maker has a good sense of what your wishes are, they can try and accommodate them as best they can. And, for instance, if you're in the hospital, perhaps they can work with the healthcare team to make it feel more home-like for you. So I think, again, it's all about this, having these conversations, so people who care for you and will speak for you can help make your wishes come true as much as possible. Next slide. Okay, so can a request for assistance in dying be included in your Advance Care Directive? So I think we have to separate, can it be included versus can it be acted on? At present, you can't really make an advance request for assisted dying. So you can, and I have, you could write in your Advance Directive what your wishes might be with respect to assisted dying, should you be in certain circumstances in the future. However, because it is not legal to have an advance request, like basically it can't be acted upon, then your substitute decision maker at present would not be able to have that acted on. It may be possible sometime in the future, but at present it would not be possible. However, if it makes you feel better to include that, let's say at the end of your Advance Care Directive, it would not invalidate the directive, and it may in some ways just provide, further guidance for your substitute decision maker, so should something occur that was not foreseen in the Advance Care Directive itself. So hopefully that responds to that question. Okay, talking to healthcare providers. So it's really important that you talk to not just your family, but your healthcare physician, if you're lucky enough to have a general practitioner, about what you want or don't want at end of life, at a time when it's not an emergency. People who have had these conversations with their healthcare provider, with their family members, generally are less fearful, they're less anxious. They feel like they're having a bit more control and influence over what happens to them. And again, speaking from my personal experience, I had in Ontario provided my general practitioner with a copy of my Advance Care Directive. And, she was very respectful of my wishes and included in my dossier, and in fact, actually asked if I could direct her to where she could get a copy of the Dying with Dignity Advance Care Directive, because she felt it was very straightforward and clear. So I think, it only takes a few minutes when you're meeting with your general practitioner to give them a signed copy of your Advance Care Directive. And then you might have an opportunity at a later appointment with them to discuss it briefly with them. Okay, we'll move on to the next slide. So, again, here are some suggestions about having this conversation with your general practitioner, your healthcare provider. And it's just another way of initiating this conversation and making sure that your wishes have some reasonable chance of being respected in the circumstances you described. And, if you feel more comfortable, you might want to take your substitute decision maker or friend with you. All right. Now, I think, Nicole, in this case, we had a question. Am I correct?
Yeah, so we did have one here, but you know what, Susan, I think you've addressed it quite a bit. The question is, when and can someone's substitute decision maker override their expressed wishes, or can their healthcare provider override their wishes, which I think you've touched on quite a bit, but maybe if you just want to give one final answer to that question.
Yes, well, there's probably not a final answer to that question, but I do actually, for those of you who are documentation hounds like I am, encourage you to have a look at your Healthcare Consent Act for your province, because it does provide some indication of when, for instance, in an emergency, a healthcare provider can basically take the action they feel is required to preserve the person's life, or if the circumstances that occur were not, let's say, specifically addressed in the Advance Care Directive. In that case, the substitute decision maker will have to interpret with the healthcare team what your wishes may have been. So we'll move on to the next slide. Okay, so I think I actually mentioned this, which is, make sure that you, when you get the Advanced Care Planning Kit, that you get the particular form for your province and territory. For those of you who feel it would be beneficial, I encourage you to have a look at the Healthcare Consent Act for your province. Make sure that each copy of your personal directive is signed and dated. So you have to have an original signature on each copy, and it needs to be witnessed by 2 persons. If you, review your document periodically, you need to have that conversation with your substitute decision maker if you've made any changes. And just make sure that it's kept where it can easily be found. So you might want to have a fridge magnet that just says, this is my substitute decision maker. Here's where you can find my Advance Care Directive. Okay, next slide. Okay, so here is an example from the Dying with Dignity kit of the Advance Care Directive. And these questions basically, direct your substitute decision maker and through that person, a healthcare team, in terms of what kind of care you wish or do not wish, and what kind of interventions you wish or do not wish. We can turn to the next page. And, you complete those sections to reflect that. If you want your life to be prolonged and you want that all life-sustaining treatments be provided, then of course you would not complete those first 3 sections, and you would indicate that in section 4. And if you don't want your life prolonged, and this is all provided in the instructions are provided in the kit, you would cross out number 4. That requires that your life be prolonged and life-sustaining treatments provided.
So we're almost at 4:30 Eastern. Susan, I'm wondering if you had any final comments or tips or anything for our attendees this afternoon.
No, I think I've probably made it clear how important I think it is that each of us have an Advance Care Directive. And I'm really delighted to see that many of you have found this webinar helpful, and that it's maybe answered some of your questions and hopefully encouraged you to go ahead and ensure that you designate a substitute decision maker and prepare your advanced directive. So thank you for your questions and for your engagement with us, and thanks to Kelsey and Nicole for so seamlessly handling the webinar.
And thanks, Susan, for joining us today. It was great to have you taking us through this very important information. I think we all learned a lot, and hopefully we can all walk away and do some additional learning and reading and completing of these documents. So to all of you who took some time out of your afternoon to join us, we appreciate it. We'd love to hear your feedback about how this session went. Once you click exit or once we shut down the webinar, you will get a survey popping up on your screen. So if you could take a few minutes, please let us know what you think, and we'll be sending out follow-up documentation to you in a few days. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.